All right, excellent.
You've joined the Betamax Video Club. We wind back to our favourite films that are based on a TV show that was recorded in the 1980s. My name's Rich Nelson, and I did Wayne's World. Watching it with me is Catherine Lowe. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Rich?
I'm good. Thank you back so soon, and thank you for bringing, I suppose it's probably a VHS of a 90s film, but along with the director's commentary, which I watched at your recommendation, and thank you.
Oh, not at all. No, she's quite kick-ass, isn't she?
She is. So let's start with what's so special about Wayne's World for you?
Well, it's a film that's quite hard to be objective about because it was such a big part of my childhood, and it's very wrapped up with memories of larking about with friends and discovering comedy together, particularly stuff that made us laugh at the adult world around us, which I think this film does really quite effectively. I grew up in a little village on Anglesey in North Wales, which you wouldn't think would have much in common with the suburbs of Chicago, but it's odd how much this film kind of resonated with me. I had an elder sister who was in a gang of friends who all really loved heavy metal, so she'd be practicing guitar riffs at home and having boyfriends with long hair and denim jackets, and they'd play in bands, and they were really into groups like Metallica and Anthrax. So I got quite a lot of the musical references in the film, things like, the No Stairway Sign and the worship of guitars and the Aerosmith t-shirts and all of that.
Well, I was in the same boat. I think this. I remember a copy of this one for the kids. I bought it from Woolworths in, I suppose it would have been 1993, I think. And it was just absolutely blew my mind. I mean, growing up in our house, we didn't have a lot of music going on, so a lot of being introduced to a lot of stuff. The soundtrack, I had it on constantly. And these two guys, obviously they're older than the people they were playing. Like, everything about this was just so shocking. And again, just kind of watching it now and watching recently, coming back and, really watching it thinking, 12, 13-year-old me loved it. I must have watched it at least 50 times.
Yes, I was the same way, and it's got that kind of playful quality to it where it exists in its own kind of strange universe where the people in it are young but they're not young, and they're kind of popular but not popular, and it has all of the kind of contradictions of being young about it, I think. And
watching a director's commentary of a film, and again, like I'd only watched a couple because I don't have a lot of time to watch films normally other than this, and sitting there thinking, I've seen this film enough times now that I think I can take it.
Yeah. And
it's really fascinating. I mean, Penelope Spheris, the director, she had a broad CV before she came to Wayne's. She really brought something different to it.
Yes, I think that her style and Mike Myers' style really complemented each other's, because she was coming from the background of being a documentary maker, having made all of these great films about music and really knowing her stuff and having the contacts in terms of heavy metal. And then Mike Myers coming from the improv comedy background that he had. And I think that you can see it when you're watching the film, that she's making sure that his humour, is kind of tamed. It's never getting too broad, because she wants it's still in its kind of grounded a universe that on some level makes sense, even though it can be pretty crazy. I think that the second Wayne's World film is very funny, I think that because they didn't have her back to do the second one, you can see that tendency that she has to kind of draw out those kind of moments of realism, maybe a little bit lost in the second one because she's not around to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I saw the second one at the cinema a few times, and that again, like you say, it was funny, but there were so many more scenes in there that they went a bit further. And then she talked about it in this film where she wanted in the real world and kept looking like it was in a suburb.
Yeah,
which is a really important part, I suppose, of if you've got actors like that, where you think, example, it's Wayne and Garth who make a sort of low public access TV show being corporate giant, having them live in a suburb that is accurate is probably quite important.
Completely. And there must be a reason why people like you and me watched it when we were young and fell for it so hard. There must have been kind of elements of it that was speaking to the way we were living and interacting with our friends. And that means, I think, that she really did do a good job at grounding it somehow in something that people could relate to.
I suppose maybe if we had been slightly older, we might have been a bit more enjoying of the. I suppose one of the iconic scenes of the film is Wayne and Garth and their friends in their car headbanging to Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
I think we'll go with a little Bohemian Rhapsody, gentlemen. Good call.
You know, which has gone far now that Mike Myers was in the Bohemian Rhapsody movie.
Yes, which I haven't seen. What's he like in it?
It's weird. He's playing like an executive of EMI, the record label, and it's just. I mean, the film itself is so strange. I've had a future episode being set, Live Aid being set in the 80s and so on, but such a token thing where I think there's a line that he quotes in there about you're not going to get teenagers banging their heads into this, about Bohemian Rhapsody, the song.
Oh, that's a nice in-joke.
Yeah, that joke went on sort of 25 plus years later into that film. But I mean, this would have come out not long after Freddie Mercury died. So again, Bohemian Rhapsody in the UK anyway had become, I think it had been re-released and been done again.
Yeah.
So again, that would have resonated with a lot of people too.
Completely. There's this shot in the car when they're singing along to it, and it gets to the end of the song, the "Nothing Really Matters" bit, and when they were shooting it, Dana Carvey hadn't practiced, hadn't gone and learnt the lyrics. So if you see that bit where he's singing along, he clearly doesn't know the words. And I was watching this time, and I was thinking, gosh, imagine a world where you hadn't heard Bohemian Rhapsody. I kind of envied him in that moment, thinking, that song was obviously still quite fresh to him. Hadn't heard those lyrics so many times. Yeah, right, at that year, and then from then on, really, it was, you just hear it all the time, don't you, now, still?
Because I think at the start of the video, actually, there was it was the music video to Bohemian Rhapsody, but it had cuts of the video and cuts of Wayne and Garth in the car, sort of sliced together. I guess in the days before, I mean, we'd satellite or cable back then, and obviously pre-YouTube, where I think this was probably the only music video as such that I would have owned, so it probably got listened to more times than most.
Yes, it was very. It was. I was aware of Wayne and Garth quite a long time before I actually saw the film. Even though I think I saw the film, when it pretty much as soon as it came out on VHS, but it was because of the fact that Bohemian Rhapsody and actually other songs were in the soundtrack as well were in the charts, and they'd be spliced into the videos of the songs that were hits. But one thing that she pointed out, Penelope Spheris, in that director's commentary, was the fact that, I mean, this is a good example of how they complemented each other, her and Mike Myers, in that he was the one that pushed for that song to be used, which obviously turned out to be a fantastic idea, and she was the one that pushed for the headbanging, which he didn't want. I think, those two ideas brought together, fantastic, and, one couldn't have worked without the other. And it's quite interesting because I think by all accounts, he did get quite annoyed at the fact that she kept pushing them to do the headbanging in that scene, kind of saying that it hurt him and he didn't think it was funny. So all credit to her, really, because it did become like a film, didn't it? You saw it everywhere, even before you'd seen the film. So
I guess in a scene like that where they talk about how they placate him and Dana Carvey, that they shot versions of the same scene so that when they did the edit, they'd be happy that they got their own versions filmed, but then she'd go off, and it sounds like juggling was going on the set.
It does. I mean, you've got to wonder whether, who knows? I wonder whether she got a harder time because she was a woman, because when I heard that account, I did think it sounded like she had to do a lot of or at least, or sort of say to everyone, don't worry, you'll get your way, and then kind of go and do her own thing in the edit, And they maybe should have trusted her a little bit more to just, do her thing. But on the other hand, collaboration with these things is such a key part of it, isn't it? And that's how you get some of the best takes. So,
It was funny, one of the things that she talked about at the beginning of the film was how Saturday Night Live, where this grew from, was essentially a boys' club. And that, because she wrote some of the sketches on the show, difficult it was to break through that to that group and how to get respected as a woman, because it was a boys' club. And so with Lorne Michaels talking about sort of survival of the fittest, and you get these kind of ideas that it's like a bear pit.
Yes, I mean, and I think it still sounds as if it's quite an intense place to work, Saturday Night Live. But, even this film, I think they had to shoot it in, well, I can't remember how many, I can't remember how many weeks it was, but in a really short space of time, in a few months between Saturday Night Live season, and with the actors having to sort of dash off back to the studio. I mean, they take it all incredibly seriously and they work really fast. So I think that the discipline on a film set in comparison was actually sort of quite, sort of more relaxed. I think Mike Myers has said that Saturday Night Live sounds if you've really got to kind of go on by the seat of your pants.
I haven't seen all of 30 Rock, but I guess would that be a sort of rough equivalent, I guess?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's pretty much what that's based on. And
Okay.
And then after, it's so funny, the Lorne Michaels, that he's this mythical character that sort of hangs over all of these things, because then there was, when Mike Myers went and did Austin Powers, there was controversy because his Dr. Evil, the character of Dr. Evil was based on Lorne Michaels, using his impression of Michaels, but apparently his impression of Lorne Michaels was based on Dana Carvey's impression of Lorne Michaels. So there was controversy about all of that, but it is kind of incredible how this man, Lorne Michaels, overseeing everything. You think, wow, he clearly has so much influence. Everyone's basing so much kind of comedy sort of on him, and kind of also taking so much advice from him, and it's quite amazing, really, one way or the other.
Strange power base to have. But,
yes, completely.
In this film, we've got so many cameos and things like that, and there was one talk the director said about some of the casting that they were expected to, and she talks about how Lowe was cast, and referred to it as like stunt casting, I think it was, where this wasn't long after his sex tape.
Yes.
And she referred to it as funny video incident. I mean, I won't go too much into it. Google it. But I mean, by all accounts, it wasn't perceived as particularly funny at the time. No,
I'm sure it wasn't. No, sounds as if it could have been, if it hadn't have been for this film, then maybe his career might have sort of just disappeared in terms of his acting career. And I don't think he would have got Parks and Recreation had it not been for this film kind of starting his comedy career, quite possibly anyway. It's an interesting piece of casting as well, because when you're watching it, and it feels like it's capturing this moment in time at the beginning of the 90s so well, and then you have Rob Lowe, who feels kind of like one of because he was part of the Brat Pack. It feels a little bit like he sort of represents that kind of 80s hedonism, kind of right in the middle of this kind of film that feels actually like it's sort of it's the 90s now, it's something different, we're going towards grunge, and there's something about that that's quite interesting when you watch it now.
Moving into the 90s, he'd be seen as kind of the older hat. But
yes.
I wonder, I didn't know the age difference between Rob Lowe and Mike Myers. I'd be interested what that would be.
They're probably, so that's a good.
In fact, older than Rob Lowe by a year.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, that's the incredible thing about Wayne's World, is you've got people convincing you on one level that they represent you. When I was watching it, probably would have been about 10. I was kind of thinking, yeah, these guys are kind of like me. But then when you watch it now, it's kind of amazing how they've done that. That that you just get a crazy universe.
And Carvey's 9 years older than him.
Right. Okay. One thing when I was watching it this time, one thing I really appreciated, actually, because there are lots of things that are quite striking in terms of their casting, and Dream Woman, is played by an actress who is the same age as Dana Carvey, in the sense that they're both in their 50s. And I thought that was really good, actually, because they could have just brought in someone, sort of early 20s, and kind of ignored the fact that Dana Carvey was kind of clearly in his mid-30s when he was making this film. And the fact that they didn't, I thought, was sort of one of the many things that makes the film hold up quite well, is that on some level they're sort of acknowledging that they're not playing, their actual ages are different to who they're playing.
No, one thing I didn't acknowledge again only really today watching it, so when we go to the Gasworks, which is the sort of the nightclub here, Meatloaf is the bouncer on the door, and we're introduced to Crucial Taunt, whose lead singer is Cassandra. I had no idea Carrera was a musician of any regard. I thought, by all accounts, she was very gifted in that department.
Yes, I didn't know that either. And now when you watch it, it does make sense, because again, another thing that struck me about it as a film in comparison to some other kind of sort of silly, almost silly comedy films, is that the music sequences in Wayne's World, I think, are really well shot. And I think Penelope Spheris was saying in her commentary that they wouldn't have worked so well had you not had a performer like Tia Carrere who was actually, she knew how to be a musician as well as how to act, and she is confident on stage as a result. She knows what she's doing, and so those music sequences are real. They're not just people kind of play acting, being musicians, and that really comes across, I think.
Yeah, she really belts out some of those songs.
She really does. She really does. That's another thing that isn't in the second film, is that this first Wayne's World film, you can tell that it is made by someone who really loves music and wants to give a bit of time to that and kind of make Cassandra the star of the film, really, rather than Wayne.
I'm just trying to think, did she sing at all in the second film?
I don't think she does, does she?
Well, she certainly doesn't have any musical numbers.
No, well, you've got to slightly, I mean, who knows, but you've got to wonder why that was, because I think it clearly worked so well in the first film. But maybe who knows, Mike Myers might have had a bit of an ego issue with that or something, because it is true, when you watch it, you think they are putting her front and centre of this film, in the sense that it's like Cassandra's our superhero, she's our sort of cowboy or whatever, and it finishes with this fantastic performance of Ballroom that's really leaves you on a high. Whereas the second film is more Wayne-centred, I think.
There's an introduction to Christopher Walken as well, which is always welcome. But I mean, in this film, we see her belting out songs. She's kicking drunks in the face. She's, I suppose, a lot of people's idea of a perfect woman.
Yes, completely. Well, the fact that he's not too terrified to talk to her in that first scene, I think, means that Wayne is brave, because, as you say, she has just beaten some people who I think only kind of accidentally spilt some drink on. But she really gives them what for. And then also in that same scene, you see her giving the manager of the club what for as well, because she hasn't been paid. I mean, she's really not submissive. I think she's a great heroine in that way.
She's not Andy, she's actually there as a kind of, I mean, yes, she is a love interest, but in many ways part of the main plot of the film. Initially it starts with Rob to purchase Wayne's World, but he then muscles in and tries to, I suppose, steal her by offering her a career. It's not just flowers and wooing her, it's actually, well, maybe it's a pretense, but trying to get her a music video and get her signed, and that was essentially being ahead. That's what Wayne does to win her back. It's
her career, isn't it, in the end, that kind of is the thing that's at stake, even more than Wayne's World, the actual TV program. It's kind of her record deal at the end that we're all kind of hanging on the edge of our seats for. And there is that scene as well where he comes and says to her, basically implying that she's sleeping with Benjamin, and she's really insulted by that and says, that's how I get a gig. And that's really good as well, because it sort of shows that she's got integrity. She does things her way, and she doesn't let people talk to her however they want to.
I mean, one way this film is prescient, looking ahead to how things are today, is the way that Benjamin's company buys Wayne's World in a bid to hook sponsors onto it. It's almost very similar to the way that I imagine, and is a bigger podcast than this, are hoovered up by larger companies in order to make money. It's from 30 years ahead of now. It's very ahead of its time.
Yes, and he has to rely on his younger date at the beginning of the film to point out to him that this is something that's popular with the kid who I think is played by Iona Skye. Is that right? From Say Anything? That scene to start a film with, a scene where you see, that Wayne and Garth are our heroes basically, and you have this gorgeous guy looking at what they're doing and going, I don't really like it and I don't really get it, is quite brave. and then, you know, having his date sort of saying to him, I think they're really funny, I think they're really good, and then him kind of going, oh, well, you know, that means that probably people out there, kids out there, do like this thing, you know, and sort of trying to take that bit of inspiration and running with it and milking them for all they're worth, I think is something that happens to people quite a lot.
Yeah, and as we find out later, when the scene where Garth is going through his apartment and reads his diary, and one of the entries is take Feeble's show and exploit it.
So funny. And and it's so, like, you know, we see stories every day sort of going around where we see that it happens to people a lot, you know, and it is all quite ahead of its time in that way, because I think that's probably happening to people now more than ever.
One thing we see is that Cassandra has another gig at what she says is her loft, and this is where Penelope's Spheris reference where the kind of rivalry between Wayne and Benjamin begins, is Wayne seen looking at Cassandra, and Cassandra, you know, I mean, I guess it's for all of us that, you know, she immediately picks on Wayne because and again, maybe, you know, having been that 13-year-old where you think, you know, am I geeky, am I goofy, you know, is Mr. Handsome Rob Lowman going to come and sneak off with whichever girlfriend I'm with at the time?
Yeah.
She references regularly how much of a nerd or a geek, or whichever word it was, a twit at one point, that Rob Lowe is, in that yes, he's handsome and yes, he's got money and a car, but he's not actually very good at talking to women.
Yes, I think he plays that kind of man quite well, and sort of it does show you, you know, that money can't buy someone everything, you know. He can be, particularly in that scene where he comes up to her and says, oh, your vocals are incredible. Even though he's incredibly gorgeous, there is something really convincingly uncool about him, and he really doesn't fit in that kind of scenario. He doesn't look relaxed at all. Yeah, you can see why she goes for Wayne, I think.
I suppose you don't go to a rock or metal night anywhere wearing a lot of beige and with really heavily gelled hair.
No. I think at that moment in time as well, it looked particularly dated. It's like one of the quotes I really like from Wayne's World is that bit where they're playing hockey, and Garth says, "Do you ever feel like Benjamin's not one of us?" And Wayne says, "Good call. It's like he wants us to be liked by everyone. I mean, Led Zeppelin write tunes that everyone liked. They left that to the Bee Gees." And I think it really sums up, you know, Wayne's World really well, because that's kind of what, I mean, apart from obviously being there to exploit them in a terrible way, Benjamin also sort of has this kind of very, very kind of narrow notion of what's good, and he thinks that everyone kind of has to be quite generic in order to have something of worth. And, you know, in Wayne's World, it does kind of hammer home that message, like, you know, just be you, just go and do your thing, and then some people will like it and some people won't get it, and that's okay, you know.
Yeah, because I guess, you know, they've enjoyed hamming up the fact that Garth is such an introvert and he's very meek and quiet, even though he's wearing, you know, Van Halen t-shirts, and sort of he might be into his rock music, but he's really a shy guy. And again, that's further explored in the sequel.
Yes,
that was an odd one.
Yes, he's based, I think he based his character on his little brother, who was this character who would be quite quiet, but would be known in the family as the person that was able to fix everything. So if the remote control broke, then his brother was able to fix it with a butter knife, and everyone would regard him as this genius. And that, I love the fact that that's who Garth is based on, because it's exactly like my nephew. I've got a 10-year-old nephew who's exactly like that. He can just fix everything. Whenever anything breaks now, if he's anywhere around, I just ask him to come and fix it, and he can. So yeah. He's a great character, Garth. Like, that's the thing. It's the whole film. Another reason why it holds up so well. It's very anti-toxic masculinity, isn't it? Even though it's in this heavy metal world, the whole thing really doesn't have the ethos of what heavy metal felt like at the time. Like, you saw people like Axl Rose and all of these terribly tough macho guys, and Wayne and Garth, you know, have the kind of opposite atmospheres around it.
You know, that slightly changes and everything goes wrong. It's, you know, when they start falling out, and when Wayne, I mean, whether he gets too big for his boots or not, I don't know, but when that becomes an issue, it's resolved by being nice to her and apologising.
Yes, yes, and they have quite a healthy airing of their views, don't they? First, which you don't hear because of the plane going overhead, but they they do confront each other with how they're feeling, which is, it's good to see two guys do that in a film. Kind of get out of their system and then resolve the conflict. Brilliant.
You really pissed me off tonight.
Garth, you've never been mad at anything in your life.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have walked out on the show. I mean, I handled it okay. But you shouldn't walk out on your friend without telling him first.
Oh, so I have to run everything by you now?
Yeah, I think you have to run everything by me now. What am I, some sort of chimp with you as always as Garth?
I mean, the whole way that this is engineered is when the first show shown on this big cable TV, and because this is Wayne's World rough and ready, it's made in parents' basement. This is all very glitzy. It's got a voiceover and blue screen and a sign and all this sort of thing where, he's immediately out of his comfort zone and suddenly has to have his sponsor as a guest on the show.
Yes.
Of course, he engineers that with the very funny cards to mock the sponsor, but brilliantly done. But again, it just shows, we're not playing in your basement anymore.
Yeah, I think it's one of those moments, probably, where lots of people who've had their thing picked up, this small sort of the thing that they've created, then picked up by people that have put a lot of money behind it, and then all the compromises that you're expected to make and how it can morph into a whole other thing that you kind of think it's not my baby anymore, it's something else, and kind of puts that across quite well. Although it really shows you, that scene, that Benjamin just doesn't get Wayne's World at all, because Wayne does the thing with Vanderhoff that will make everyone laugh with the cards, and then he gets fired for doing it, even though that everyone at home would have really liked that. All the people that usually watch Wayne's World, they would have thought that was a really funny scene. So he essentially gets fired for doing the thing that he normally does on the show, which shows that Benjamin hadn't really thought through the whole thing anyway.
Is this the equivalent of Channel 5 hiring some podcaster or someone off YouTube and realising that they've actually hired a complete bellend?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I suppose it's the equivalent of when ITV hired Dapper Laughs after he became quite popular on Twitter, and I think that went wrong quite quickly, and it's almost like, do they not do any research?
And you sort. It's funny, actually, because when Wayne's World came out, it would have been at exactly the same time as Vic Reeves' Big Night Out was huge. And that's an example of something where, actually, because they let someone do pretty much exactly what they would have done when they were doing it in its original form, where they sort of behaved as if they didn't even have any kind of budget, behind it or anything. Everything was done in this very DIY way, only this time it was for Channel 4 in front of an audience. They managed to retain its original charm, which is sort of why it became so successful. Whereas in something like this, when you see what it morphs into once Wayne has sold the program, then it immediately loses what's good about it. And it has that terrible voice, that guy kind of saying "Party on, Wayne" and "Party on, Gus." The guy doing the song in that terrible voice, and you think, oh God, it's awful.
Okay, boomer.
Yes, yeah.
Wayne's World is brought to you by Noah's Arcade. Party on, Wayne.
Hey! Wayne's World! Wayne's World! Party time! Excellent! It's Friday. It's 11:30. It's time to party with your excellent host, Wayne Campbell. And with him, as always, is Garth.
Party on, Wayne, and party on, Garth.
Wayne's World!
One thing, this was my favourite bits when I was younger, and again coming back, the part where they're talking about the role that the sponsor plays. This is the huge product placement gag where they've got basically saying they'll never sell out, except you've got Garth dressed head to toe Reebok, saying it's like people only do things they get paid, and that's just really sad. I
feel like I quote that a lot. Yeah, it's so great. It's so great.
There's like being an Instagram influencer when you get sent any old tat in the post and you've got to pretend, oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yes, exactly, and it has that. I suppose it has that dual quality to it as well, where it's also quite a common thing for people to be fully buying into the thing that's going to be making the money, but also saying things like, kind of saying anti-capitalist things, where they're kind of contradicting the thing that they're doing with what they claim that their worldview is, if you see what I mean. So it's really funny.
And as well, I mean, some of the bits, I don't know, maybe because again, the commentary was talking about how they had to struggle, to get a lot of the clearance to play these products in the film. And I don't know an awful lot about the process, but you kind of think, I mean, for some of those things, I mean, at that, I don't think we had Doritos in the UK.
No.
At that point, so I never knew what a Dorito was, and I don't even know what the painkillers or something like
Little
that.
yellow different. No, I didn't know what they were either. Yes, it actually taught me a bit about product placement, that bit, when I was watching it when I was young. It's actually quite it's quite prescient, and I think maybe after I'd seen that scene in Wayne's World, I started to kind of notice product placement in things much more than I would have done before. In fact, I probably wouldn't have noticed at all. And then ever since then, when I'm watching certain films, I'll kind of think, oh yeah, they've picked up that can quite a lot of times now. We've seen the logo on that cereal box quite a lot, and yeah, we start to sort of realise,
Because I think the rules have changed in this country now, but you see certain film, one of the Pop Idol or one of the whatever they're called, I think in America they have like branded Coke glasses on the desk, and then when it showed in this country all blurred, they've blurred the logo off these glasses because for whatever reason it doesn't meet their rules.
Yes. Oh, okay. So it depends on where you're putting the thing out. Yeah.
Contract or no, I will not bow to any sponsor.
And I suppose if you put a can of Pepsi in a big Hollywood movie, as long as it's not making Pepsi look bad, then I mean Pepsi have paid anything for that? I don't know. And it's great advertising. Yeah,
I really wanted to know that. I wanted to know whether they just had to get the clearance for those things, or whether they did pay. But it sounded like they just did have to get clearance, rather than it being something that those people were going to be paying for. But it's so funny. There's a film you've probably seen it, called Reality Bites. And in that film, something similar happens to Winona Ryder's character, where she's made something via camcorder about her friends, and then it gets sold to a studio, and she doesn't like what they've done with it in terms of the kind of product placement, and she feels as if they've ruined her art, and she doesn't want to compromise on it. But it's so funny because of the film, there's a lot of product placement in it, and then it turned out that in order for them to be able to get the Reality Bites to be financed, they did have to do a lot of product placement in the film itself. So there are it's sort of this interesting time, beginning of the 90s, where you're having these films that are being financed in this way, that are also trying to make a statement about how people have to make these compromises. So yeah, it kind of goes in a circle, doesn't it?
Yes. And it's the choice of a new generation.
The Bond films, about how some of the things that he uses are so heavily branded, and Rory, when I think it's Casino Royale, and he drove a Ford, and it was James Bond drives an Aston Martin, but in this he drove a Ford Mondeo because they were trying to sell Ford Mondeos. Ford, I think at the time, or Aston Martin. So that was part of. So that was part of the kind of thing of being allowed to use it. Was, well, we'll give you some Aston Martins for you, but yeah, Bond has to drive a Mondeo. He's on the train talking about his $5,000 watch, and you could probably second-hand Mondeo for $5,000 if you look in the right places.
That's amazing. That's amazing that they can have that much power.
You're almost waiting for a Star Wars film turning up and they're wearing Nike trainers or something like that.
I have to say, it is always a bit upsetting when you hear about these kind of compromises that people have to make for these sort of things. I think I used to be so romantic about the idea of filmmaking and television program, that it never occurred to me that anyone would have to, just not have the thing that they wanted their character wearing because of these kind of sponsorship deals and stuff. Yeah, it's all a bit sad. But it's funny scene though, this, in terms of the way it points that out. So,
and again, it's just perfect for if you're trying to something that whether it's contrary to your politics or something, or even if you're trying to sell a Patreon subscription, then
It's like people only do things because they get paid, and that's just really sad.
well,
anyway, if you're hearing this, you've probably already paid, so it's fine.
Yeah, well, exactly, and.
One bit we did skip over and I was going to ask was the scene where they go to Benjamin's apartment, and it's this sort of really, well, bear in mind the early 90s, this would have been really, I mean, looking at it now, it looks awful.
No, it does look awful, doesn't it? It does.
Some of the furniture in there just looks like, ugh.
Yes, and he's got his self-help books out for all to see in the little stack, and I thought, oh, if I were him, I'd probably hid those.
How to pick up women was one of the ones I wrote down.
Yeah. No, it looks like a very soulless apartment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say was, because Garth refers to it as a fully functional babe lair. This is the kind of contradiction between what some people see as a babe lair and some people don't. I mean, I kind of thought when I got my first flat when I was living on my own, and the first thing I did was buy an arcade game of Terminator 2, because that's what you do with money for food.
Yeah.
And I think that lasted about a month before I had to get rid of it again. What was I doing?
Yeah.
Would that be a babe lair to you, or to some 1992? Do you think?
Well, I think that's the thing about Cassandra, is that you don't really get the feeling that kind of thing matters that much to her. I mean, it's certain, I suppose, when you sort of see how high up it is, and it has the view, and it looks like maybe quite a lot of money has been poured into it, then if someone wanted to go out with someone purely for a certain kind of lifestyle where they just know that they'd be in the lap of luxury, then I suppose it would appeal to them. But anyone with maybe a bit more substance to them might find it kind of the sort of flat that lacks atmosphere, and where the person in it, it's not really clear what they're into, like what actually kind of drives them beyond having a flat that they can show off to people.
Yeah.
And some people, I think, are quite into that, but you don't really know what else it is that excites them, So.
Have you ever played the Terminator 2 arcade game?
I haven't, I'm afraid, no.
Okay.
What's it like?
You'd have enjoyed 24-year-old me. Yes. Because after the scene where... So Wayne's been from his show, he's fallen out with Garth, and he's been dumped by Cassandra, he said, basically accusing her of sleeping with Benjamin to get ahead in her career. Where he comes out into the kind of alley and says he's been shit on and that. Have you seen the cut version of this that they show on Comedy Central?
No!
It's ridiculous. They basically... I mean, they show this film. I mean, yes, is it a PG or a 12? And yes, there is some swearing in there. But they show it on like a Sunday lunchtime. And essentially, they don't try and dub over it. They just cut. All of a sudden in this scene, Wayne cuts from at the top of the ramp outside Cassandra's to further down where he's doing the thumbs up bit.
Yeah.
And jumps, it just completely cuts the things out. And I kind of...
Well, so they just don't have the moment where he loses it at all?
Yeah, basically he jumps from leaving the apartment to sticking his thumbs up.
Oh no!
They cut about 10 seconds out just like that.
Oh dear.
It's really random.
Yes, that must make it come across like such a... So he gets dumped by his girlfriend and comes outside and then gives a thumbs up.
Yeah, and then the transport's sort of 20 yards down the road. But,
no.
yes.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
At the start of Wayne's plan to get his life back on track, he goes off to Stan Nikita's donut shop, which looks amazing.
I love the donut shop. I'm obsessed with the donut shop.
I didn't realise it was a flower shop.
I didn't either.
That's random, isn't it?
It is random. The first moment that they, I think it's 10 minutes into the film, the first moment when they go into the donut shop and you meet, is it Glenn, the manager, and you've got Everything I Hate About You by Ugly Kid Joe playing in the background. I think like that might be one of like my favourite moments of the film, because it's just, I don't know, it sort of sums up everything that was great about being young. You just think, oh, it's such a crazy world, this film, and everyone's just so weird and funny, and yeah, I don't know, it's brilliant.
Now, the plan itself is quite convoluted. It's quite hard to explain. It involves positioning of satellites in order to send a feed of Cassandra's band playing to the record executive that we heard about at the Alice Cooper concert, the security guard giving us far too much information. That'll come in handy later on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Played by, is that Chris Farley?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good little cameo. Yeah, and I love the way when he's moving his hands, they move their heads. And he gets the location wrong and he has to adjust his hand. That's so great. Yeah.
Oh, we missed the Alice Cooper thing.
We have. Yeah, we should definitely go back to that.
Yeah, went to see Alice Cooper with backstage passes, and yes, this was probably the ever iconic thing that everyone keeps referring to. Drop down to your knees.
Have you ever done that? Have you ever done the "We're not worthy" to anyone in real life?
I don't think I have, but to be honest, where you kind of think you meet someone, whether you revere them in some regard. God, I'm trying to think of who I'd do it to.
Yeah.
Steve Guttenberg, probably.
Yes, I'll have to just reserve it for him, I think. I'd do it to, if I met Molly Ringwald. I'd do it.
Royalty.
No brainer, yeah, exactly. But Penelope Spheeris, this shows how much pull Penelope Spheeris had, because I think they wanted Aerosmith for that concert scene, and that was because they already knew them and they'd already been on Saturday Night Live to do a sketch with them. And she wanted to get someone else in just to differentiate the film from the TV series a bit, and so she just called up her friend Alice Cooper and got Alice Cooper. And I think she was like trying to choose between Alice Cooper and Ozzy Osbourne, kind of ended up opting for Alice Cooper. So it does sound like she sort of genuinely just knew everyone in the rock world, and I quite like that as a sort of, a subversive thing where it's the woman involved in the film that knows all the rockers. It's quite great. So.
Yeah, I suppose it makes a nice change. I mean, they probably get hassle for being on podcasts now, but
yeah,
I guess as well, like, actually quite yes, we skirted over it, but to have Alice Cooper basically play a song in a film, that's quite a large part really for him. It's not just a cameo, like Meatloaf could have turned up, done his part in 10 minutes and gone, but they actually put on a show. She actually was involved in the designing of the stage. Yes,
they made the whole set for him and everything, didn't they? Yeah, no, it does look like you're at a real Alice Cooper concert, and it's a very good cameo of him in the sense that, as you say, he does get to do his thing for, she gives him a bit of time to really be Alice Cooper on stage before you go backstage, and he does his great little comedy bit about Milwaukee.
You wonder how much of that is him and how much of it's lying. You kind of think, if you ever meet him, is that the sort of thing he might come out with?
Yeah, I do wonder how much of that is. I mean, obviously they wrote it for him, but you do. I think ever since I saw this the first time in my head now, I do think that is what Alice Cooper is like if you meet him in real life.
I mean, one thing you touched on there was how we mentioned it earlier about how this so different from the sequel, in the fact that in the sequel Aerosmith were a huge part of the film.
Yes.
Where they've just kind of gone, well, we didn't do it in the first one, let's do it in the second.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems, with the benefit of hindsight and watching, and hearing the director's tales about this kind of, it's almost like, well, she's not there, so it's almost like having a supply teacher where you can do whatever you want.
Yes, completely. And I think at the time, because I was a big reader of smash hits, I can remember there being various interviews with Mike White where he did say that his favourite album of all time was Aerosmith's Pump, which was the big album that was out at the beginning of the 90s. So I think that he obviously had quite a personal relationship with them and did really love their music. So he's probably quite keen to get them involved with the second film.
See, again, I don't know if this was part of my sheltered upbringing or anything, but I think even at the point that this came out, I was only really starting to become aware of Aerosmith. I think BBC Two showed some of the Wayne's World Saturday Night Live sketches around the time this came out on video, and that was really the first time I'd heard of them.
Yeah, and I think Tom Hanks played their roadie. No, it's funny, isn't it, how you did, like, in order to, this is, like, we both relatively speaking, know so much about Saturday Night Live for a programme that in order to see any of, you had to be awake at midnight on a Friday, BBC Two, whatever, or maybe Channel 4, and yeah, it was quite difficult back then to sort of find out what Saturday Night Live was like, because you didn't have the broadcast.
Yeah, because I think of early days of YouTube, there were lots of clips of it. Lots of them have become famous, whether it's the more cowbell Christopher Walken film or something like that. But I think it's on in this country now. It's on Sky pretty much whether it's live or the day after. And I watched one quite recently because Daniel Craig and at least showed he has a sense of humour and that. But I think a lot of the jokes, they're clearly written for an American audience. And I mean, I don't know, maybe I wasn't in the right frame of mind when watching it, but some of it went right over my head.
Yes, I think that they're probably writing it specifically for the people that watch. Although, yeah, I mean, it's obviously because it's something that's written so fast and they have to just keep churning out so much stuff week in, week out, that probably, like with other sketch shows, it's going to be a bit hit and miss, and it might depend a bit on which episode you see, I suppose. Yeah.
So as part of Wayne's scheme, he has to get Cassandra back to do a live show in his basement for Mr. Big. He has to go and rescue her from the music video that Benjamin set up for her, which I guess in his eyes looks like a glorified excuse to get her in a bikini wielding an 80-pound snake, which is probably some people's fantasy.
A snake that's asleep.
And really, again, this just shows how sleazy he is when, after Wayne has kind of, he's been humiliated and made to look like an idiot, he sidles up behind her and the snake reaches over and goes, "Is that you or the snake?"
Oh, yeah, that's what makes her realises that moment that maybe she should go with Wayne. It's that sequence where Wayne opens where he says, and I think you and I both know that there is no film in this camera, and he opens it up and all the film comes out. That's definitely one of my favourite bits of the film. I love how it's shot, because the film starts coming out and then it cuts away from him and then it cuts back to him and it's coming out really, really fast, and it just sort of lets you watch it come out just for a few seconds, just holds it there. I think it's very, very funny indeed. I always laugh out loud though. I don't think I've ever managed to not laugh at that bit.
They just let him wallow extra second.
Yes.
While all this is happening, Garth and the rest of the gang are off trying to hack into the satellite and to the theme tune to Mission Impossible. And I think this is the bit I relate to most, when Garth lands or he crawls on his keys, and it's almost like he's a dad at a soft play crawling through the gym and suddenly has little bruises at the tops of his legs.
Oh gosh, I can imagine.
And then, yeah, basically the film's climax, Wayne's basement, sorry, he lives with his mum. Benjamin gets stopped and given a cavity search by the rather, how can I put it, overzealous cop.
Yes, that's one of the things about this. I think it all feels very fresh, but that element of it feels quite a bit more sort of its time, or cavity search thing.
And police were like in America at the time, but he seemed quite hungry to get his hand up, whatever.
Because that's one thing I was going to say about Wayne's World that I really like, is that it's a film that's, very silly, but it's not a gross out film, and that's quite rare. Like, I think that's become even more rare now. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have, even though, all the comedy isn't always taken from the most obvious place in Wayne's World, whereas when you get to like the second or third Austin Powers film or something, everything gets so much more broad and much more sort of toilet humour gets. And it's not that, I think like well-placed toilet humour, if it works, it works, go for it. But I quite like the way Wayne's World is quite often not massively obvious with where it's going to go, with where it gets its comedy.
Yeah, it's nice to meet from the guy who played the other Terminator in Terminator 2.
Yeah, that's really good.
Now, this is the bit that I always found really quite bold, and then you see when you hear the director's commentary, it was bold because it having a film.
It is quite random. And I think I've always sort of found it difficult. You really want to believe in the super happy ending. So There's something about the journey that the two other ones take you on that sort of disconcerts you. You think, oh no, she didn't end up with Benjamin, did she? Don't even imply that might have happened. That's terrible.
And that was the one they doubled down on.
Yes. Which one did you want?
I'd have been intrigued to see where the Scooby-Doo ending went. It kind of ended, they Benjamin, and that was kind of it. Yeah, I mean, that one was certainly, I suppose it's like any film, if the main character dies at the end or something like that, I didn't see that coming. You know, this could have been the Kaiser Soze of the comedy world.
No, I don't. Because there's an implication as well that if Mr. Big didn't want to sign up Cassandra, then she would have ended up with Benjamin. I don't like that implication in the sad ending, because then you think, you know, I want to think that Cassandra just wouldn't have ended up with Benjamin because he's not interesting enough and he exploits people, etc. And then also, Stacey, who we haven't talked about, comes along at that bit. Wayne, I'm pregnant. That's why I've been so moody, which is one of the least good bits in the film, I think. I like her bit earlier on with the gun rack, but her being pregnant and moody at the end, I think, is a bit too much.
It's a bit of a cop out, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a bit. Yeah. Well, she gets really thrown around during the course of the film.
I suppose that's most people's fears is a psycho ex-partner. I mean, the pregnancy bit only goes one way, I suppose. But
yes, I was going to say I've never. Yeah, a guy hasn't come up to me and broken the news to me that he's pregnant with my child.
I don't know this episode of Jerry Springer once. Oh.
Okay. But yes, this film would have come out only a few years after Fatal Attraction, and I feel like Fatal Attraction did, you know, so it had such a massive kind of effect on people in terms of fearing these crazy women that could become obsessed with them, you know. So I think Stacey's slightly suffering the shadow of Fatal Attraction a bit. But I do find the gun rack scene earlier on, that is very funny. Although now I think at the time when I watched it when I was a kid, I thought that scene was very funny, and now I feel a bit like, oh, I relate to both people in the scene, where I kind of think, oh, I feel like I've been on the receiving end of a gun rack and maybe the giver of a gun rack.
I suppose some days, you know, people have just be like, oh God, I'm running late. What's in the Argos book?
Yeah, exactly. Completely. You haven't thought it through.
Yeah, quick. I'm in a hurry. Quick.
Basically, please like me.
I bought you something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Did you hear also, just to go off on one more tangent, the Penelope Spheris brought up during that director's commentary that she was originally offered Spinal Tap?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. I thought it was an amazing fact.
That's so weird. I mean, again, it shows her regarding the industry.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, again, she'd been doing documentaries and, you know, literally everything music based. But I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, like, you think Spinal Tap is one of the, and I know why she refused it. You know, she wanted to be seen as disrespecting the genre or the music itself. But I mean, how weird would that have been? How that out?
So weird. So, like, it is. I mean, what an amazing thing. And she sort of throws it in there as like, oh, here's an interesting fact. You know.
Here's what you could have won.
Mattered to me exactly about doing Spinal Tap. I'm like, what? Come again? That's incredible. So yeah, as you say, it does show how connected she was to both the comedy world and the music, and the fact that she couldn't quite bring herself to do something that was that satirical about the genre. Yeah, there's something quite sweet about that. There's quite a lot of integrity to it.
So I didn't know if, again, you know, maybe that might have come up if I'd done more trivia reading before I'd done the Spinal Tap episode. But yeah, I mean, just read something like that. It's just so strange, you know, how whether it's Hollywood or had she made a decision, how different things would have been. I mean, different.
I mean, I think that's the thing with Spinal Tap. You just have to. It would have been just a different thing. But you've got to, when something ends up as good as Spinal Tap, because I really do think, you know, Spinal Tap might be the best film ever made. You think, oh, I'm glad, you know, everyone kind of made the decisions they made because obviously the chemistry of all the people that made it in the end worked so well, and that it's so rare that something comes together so seamlessly. So in that sense, probably right. The inclusion of the inclusion of Foxy Lady in Wayne's World is also Penelope Spheris's idea, and I think really inspired choice. That used to be, I think, when I used to watch it with my friend, that definitely used to be one of our favourite scenes. We just thought it was so funny, and I really, I kind of think of Dana Carvey doing the ears now whenever I hear that. But it was so, when I was watching an episode of Celebrity University Challenge last Christmas, and it was a music round, and they played the beginning of Foxy Lady, and so these are all people kind of, they would have been kind of, I guess, sort of the majority of them in their kind of 40s and 50s, and yeah, very, very successful, but none of them recognised the beginning of Foxy Lady. And I had two thoughts. One was like, oh wow, that's one of Jimi Hendrix's most kind of known tracks. It's interesting they don't know that. And then two, I was thinking that must mean that none of them have ever seen Wayne's World.
I'm trying to decide whether I should try and do 3 endings to this podcast or not. I don't know. I don't know how a Scooby-Doo ending. I mean, obviously, lockdown times. Yeah, I told you I'd try and get one in. We're doing this over Skype, so I can't exactly unmask you as a Scooby-Doo villain. But
Well, that wraps it up. But there's one last thing. Let's just see who you really are, mister. Why, it's Old Man Withers, the guy who runs the haunted amusement park.
And I would have got away with it, too, if it hadn't been for you snooping kids.
Good one, Shaggy.
Well, Katrin, thank you very much for bringing your VHS copy of Wayne's World. If anyone listening to this hasn't listened to your previous episode, previous appearance that was on A Fish Called Wanda, go back and listen to it. It was really good. Where can people find you on social media?
They can find me. I'm at Kitty Costanza on Twitter and on Instagram, and because of it being locked down at the moment, everything's sort of everything that's in the pipeline is slightly slower than usual, but as soon as I have anything to promote, it'll be on there, so you should keep a lookout.
Yes, and so we talked about when we're doing some theatre production work in the future.
Yeah,
I'll be there in the front row waving with my Wayne's World cap on.
Fantastic. Perfect.
I actually got one free with video. It wasn't as good as the one Wayne wore, but I did wear it quite a lot. Decent merchandise.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's probably worth a lot now.
Yeah, I've on eBay, see what they are, although you can probably just buy them brand new, I guess. But
yeah. Oh, well. Well, definitely.
Now, as you educated me before we recording, the #1 song when this came out, now this came out in the UK on the 22nd of May 1992, was Please Don't Go by
KWS.
There we go. See? Who needs Google? Anyway, Katrin, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been lovely to be back.
Thank you. Scooby-Doo in.
I would have got away with it had it not been for those pesky kids.
That's all right, they're asleep.